Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Diverse Talk Matters.
To talk about different things around diversity, equity, inclusion, talk about things that people may find challenges with, so we hope you find them really useful. Some are around people's different lived experiences, some really challenging conversation, things that sometimes we don't need to talk about. But we really hope you enjoy the range of topics that we are introducing to you or bringing to you, to your homes, to your house, to your workplaces.
We hope you enjoy. Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of Diverse Talk Matters. My name's Natasha, the founder director of Diverse Matters, and I've got two wonderful guests with me today talking everything by inclusion, bisexual inclusion. Without further ado, I will introduce my guests. So first we'll have Lynne Nicholls. Can you please say hi and give us a little bit of background about yourself?
Hi, my name is Lynne. My pronouns are she and her, and I work across the education and housing sectors. And I've also done a lot of work in diversity and inclusion, specifically also around in the education sector, Schools Out and LGBT plus History Month, and in housing around House Proud and trying to create LGBT homes for LGBT plus people.
Thank you very much, Lynne. Marcus?
Hi, my name's Marcus Morgan. My pronouns are they, them. I've been a bisexual community activist now for more than 30 years, primarily working within the community, creating inclusive spaces for bisexual people.
Brilliant. And before we started this podcast, we were having a little chat, weren't we? And we were talking about the definition, and we were saying that the bi community and bi inclusion is an area that probably people know less about. People might know about lesbian, gays, particular issues, but not necessarily bi. So we're going to start off with one question in both your minds. Somebody said to you, what's your definition of bisexuality, of being bi? I'll start with you, Lynne.
So for me, I would say it is down to the individual, because bisexuality dictionary definition is attracted to more than one gender. I think there's this approach that it must be male or female, and it's more than one gender. And I think it's how do you prescribe to that, and that there are other definitions in there which are pan, which Marcus I know we'll talk about more and different definitions through. But for me, I identified as bisexual because I go with the definition of being attracted to more than one gender. And in my world, their gender is on a spectrum, and there are multiple genders, not just two.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lynne. Marcus, please.
When I was growing up, the definition of bisexuality, it was in the dictionary back in the 19th, was sexually attracted by both men and women. And it's worth saying that because I think it shows how far we've come in relatively short time in terms of language, to a stage where we're no longer talking about it in terms of there being a two-person shortlist. It's either men or women. And the word both there very much says there's going to be two things, and that's as many as there will be. So both men and women. And at that time, the dictionary definition of homosexual and heterosexual didn't reference specific sexes at all. They just said attracted to opposite or attracted by different. And for me, I think one of the big changes that's happened in the way we think about bisexuality is getting out from under other people's ways of describing who we are and moving over to a way of describing ourselves that we can see is true for ourselves. And it's really important, I think, that people use the words that feel right to them and define them in the way that feels right to them. If someone says to me, oh, you're not bisexual because bisexual means this, I can say to me, bisexual means attracted to more than one gender. And that definition comes out of a group I founded called the Bisexual Index, which was set up about, I think, 12 years ago now, really to give people a simple definition of bisexuality that had as few words as possible while still being a workable definition. Because at that time people were saying things like bisexuality doesn't have a fixed meaning, bisexuality is always fluid, bisexuality can't be pinned down. And the problem politically in the queer scene for that was it meant that people would transferring these ideas onto bisexual people. Bisexual people have to be fluid. Bisexual people can't be pinned down. Bisexual people can't give a straight answer. Bisexual people change their minds all the time. And that, I think, really harmed bisexuality within LGBT. And people do say to me, what's the difference between bisexual and pansexual? And it's an interesting one, because to many people, bi and pan mean exactly the same thing. And to many people, bi and pan mean completely different things. It's a bit like how if you're making colours by mixing lights, you use two different colours to get green or orange. But if you're mixing it using paint, you use an entirely different set of colours. It's a different way of looking at yourself. And what you need to do is find the word that reflects how you feel about yourself. For me, pansexuality is more about taking gender out of the equation and saying it's not actually gender related at all. I want to tell you who I'm attracted to, and it's not everyone, but it's not restricted or limited or categorized by gender. Whereas bisexuality is more about appealing to people's existing understanding of diversity and saying, well, as a straight person, you're very invested in which gender you feel you allow yourself to be attracted to. So let me use the handles you're giving me to steer the bike towards the destination I want it to go to.
Thanks, Marcus. What about you? What are your thoughts on... Yeah, go on, Lynne, carry on.
So I think for me, the definition of bisexuality being very rigid in men and women had some other unintended consequences, and it meant it struggled for me within my journey to realise I was bisexual. And I thought I had to either be straight or a lesbian, which was really challenging because I was neither. And so that 50-50 part, because I thought that meant I had to be equally attracted to men as equally attracted to women in that different rigid definition. And so for me, that was a real barrier for quite a long time, because I'm not equally attractive in that sense. I find some men attractive, but more women attractive, for example. And I also find non-binary people attractive. So it was that kind of, by women or men, for me, a trans woman is a woman and a trans man is a man. So just for the definitions that way. But so for me, it was a really restrictive definition. So that wider encompassing one was better for me. But for me, with pansexuality, I see it as an sort of like an absence of gender, in a sense that's not a factor. Whereas for me, I'm attracted to more than one gender, but gender is a factor within that. So that's why in my definition, I identify as bisexual. I don't identify as pansexual, because it plays a part for me. And I think that, and it's those nuances that are really important, and you can't put your label onto somebody else. This is my definition, and I see it as an umbrella. So I see it as there's pansexuality, there's bisexuality, and there's also a bi plus spectrum. And so that's where I am on that journey, and that's what fits me and what serves me and doesn't restrict me.
Definitely. And when we talk to people, I know you two would be exactly the same. People should be able to self-identify. We shouldn't be telling them, we heard on this podcast, or we heard in this, that this is it. No, you self-identify, whatever you are, whether it's sexual orientation, race, whatever it may be. Absolutely. Because like you said, everybody's understanding or perception is different for reasons of their lived experience. Brilliant, thanks for that. Sometimes when it comes to bi-inclusion, you sometimes hear that the B is the silent in the LGBT plus spectrum, LGBTQ spectrum or terminology. What are your thoughts on that, about the B being the silent, the one when it comes to sexual orientation? Marcus, I can see Marcus doing some deep thought there.
I think this comes out primarily from historical reasons, that when particularly in the UK, the gay scene, as it was back in the 1950s and so on, was getting established, and spaces were being created before decriminalisation that gay men primarily could gather to make contact with each other, to find partners, to get validation. This was very much as a reaction to the existing structures that the UK had. So it was in the form of pubs. It was the back room in bars. It was very much a drinking scene. And at that time, if you were attracted to both men and women, if you were attracted to more than one gender, if you were attracted regardless of gender, however you want to describe someone who was attracted to multiple options there, you didn't really want to have a third place, because if you were looking for a different gendered partner, there was an existing community for that. It was if you were looking for a similar gendered partner that you needed to go somewhere else. And so the people who were looking for those partners created the gay scene. And since day one, there's been bisexual people in those spaces. But because of the political nature of the time, because of decriminalisation, and then all of the gay rights movement that happened out of that, going through the 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on, we've had a situation where politically saying, oh, I'm not actually gay, let me stop and tell you a thing, and here's a long definition, and here's an explanation of my life journey, and this isn't useful. It wasn't useful. It wasn't short. It wasn't punchy. It didn't fit on a placard. And so for years and years, the bisexual element within the gay scene was invisible, was minimized, partly because people thought it was a bad idea to speak up, because it was very much a us and them behind the barricades mentality. I remember the London Bisexual Group had a banner which we would take with us on to Pride marches. And I can remember over the years the way it was altered. Someone took some scissors to it eventually. It originally said, London Bisexual Group, big letters, bisexual and proud to be gay. Because back at that time, if someone stopped you in the queue to a club and said, sorry, you can't come in here, this is a gay club, I, for example, would reply, I am gay, I'm bisexual. Because I was talking about the word gay as meaning I experience attraction to people of similar genders, as opposed to the whole identity and community thing that the word has also come to mean. By the end of the 1990s, that banner had been snipped down to read London Bisexual Group, bisexual and proud to be. Because by then, if someone said to me, are you gay? I'd say, no, I'm bisexual. And I think that's what we've got as a terms of historical setup. And I'm very much aware I'm here to be crotchety old man Morgan, keeper of history. So as Lynne has already pointed out, what's happened is we've got to a situation where people don't feel they can speak up about being bisexual people in LGBT spaces. And this means that when other bisexual people come into those spaces and they look around and they don't see anyone out as bisexual, they assume they're the only person there who's bisexual. And that feels unwelcoming. And then they don't stay. Because one of the big hurdles the bisexual visibility has, I think, is that we're told there are either no or virtually no bisexual people. And so when we don't see clear evidence of bi people, we assume there aren't any. Now, this isn't true. There are lots of bisexual people. We're just trained not to see them because we don't assume that the people in the gay club are gay or bisexual or lesbian or bisexual, or that person over there with the hat on, or they could be gay or bisexual. We look around and go, that person presumably is gay, that person presumably is lesbian, that person presumably is gay, because we're not taught by society to put people into more than two boxes. So if we go somewhere that's gay, we switch from assuming everyone is straight to assuming everyone is gay.
Yeah.
We don't think there's another option, a third, a fourth, a fifth option that people can be. And so every survey which is done online, which is sufficiently anonymous, and it's a good test of how successfully anonymous a survey is, shows that the LGBT community is mostly bisexual. And that's an enormous thing to take in, that the majority of people who identify as LGBT, who complete surveys, when asked, say, yes, I am to an extent or another attracted to more than one gender. And the thing about bisexuality is, as we said earlier, it doesn't have to be equal.
Yeah.
So if you're a bit bisexual, you're bisexual. And so we have the situation where people assume there's no one else there, and then they don't go. And so that brings down the number of people who are bisexual in those spaces. And that's why I think it's really important when someone there does say to you, oh, actually, I'm bisexual, that we uplift that bravery and support that, because that's fighting against a great historical push to not be out as bisexual in the LGBT community.
Right, cheers, Marcus. Excellent explanation, and it's really good. Interesting how I'd never thought of it like that. So when you go into a club, and it's so true that people, if you go into a gay club, everybody's going to assume first thought that you are gay, and I can't believe I've never even thought of that. But it's so true for a lot of people. Lynne, what about yourself?
So what
in terms of
I was
the
thinking,
being the silent?
Yeah, I would say that it is, and it isn't, and it's really interesting, Marcus, because for me, I came out on the scene in kind of 97-ish, so it was shifting and changing. But even then, when I came out, I tried to look butch. I am quite a femme presenting person. I'm also can be quite tomboyish in my kind of clothes options, but I tried to look butch because I thought that's how I had to fit in. It was still a very segregated scene, and the only thing that kind of made it a much easier journey for me is because I joined the Pink Singers, which is the oldest LGBT plus choir in Europe, and that was a space where there were lesbian, bisexual, transgender, gay people from all different cultures and from across the world, because it's in London, so you have all sorts of different people in there of different ages. And for me, that was such a safe space to be, because I had lots of space to be that was with other people of all sorts of genders, whereas on the scene, it was very much female space, male space. So we used to find it quite challenging to find spaces to be together as a group. And I lament because a lot of those spaces had now gone, like Rest in Peace First Out, which was amazing. And we used to be able to go there together. And I also remember being challenged in spaces, as in you shouldn't be here, to the point that I then identified as lesbian when I first came out, because I didn't know there was another option. So it took me, it was almost like a second coming out later on, because I realised I could be. And that was in 97. So shifting kind of scenes that way. And I think also in the media, there had been portrayals of bisexuality, but not necessarily the most helpful. And it wasn't as mainstream through. And I think representation is getting better, but it still has a ways to go. But I also think there was this thing about, why are you this or that? You had to be one or the other, because you had to be born that way. And I am born this way, but I'm born this way as bisexual. And I don't think that was a message that we were still fighting for rights. It wasn't a time that was ready to necessarily hear that, even in early 90s, beginning noughties, I would say, to some extent. So that was all the kind of backdrop of you fighting that. And then there was also then stigma on both sides of the community that you would face. So it's not somewhere where you want to come out. And also there's that point where you can choose then. So there was the kind of, okay, you can choose this, therefore you can choose to have, and I'm going to use a quote because I hate this word, normal, air quotes, life, and be heterosexual. So you're just choosing to be different and etc. And so there's still some of that sort of stigma through. And for some people, it was seen as, oh, it's just because you haven't accepted your sexuality yet, either whichever way you're going on that. So it's definitely that invisibility side. And as women, there's some other invisibilities as well, because you're not always in those spaces just for many reasons, whether it be caring responsibilities, and I'm not saying men don't have them, but predominantly women have a lot of caring responsibilities, or whether it be just disposable income. And as Marcus said, a lot of the scene was about going out. So I think there's those sort of things. And then there's, for women in many ways, for women and men, bisexuality is seen differently, and for women, it's very highly sexualized, and it's seen almost as a bit of a joke. So there's a differing thing, and then within the scene, there are things that make that challenging as well, because there are women who don't want to be with a woman who is bisexual, and so on. So and I think there's also phrases like bi-curious that didn't necessarily help during that. I don't know what you think to that term, Marcus, but I'd be interested on the bi-curious term.
Bi-curious is one of these terms that I think people feel very clever about slapping on other people. The idea that people who are bisexual but not as bisexual as all that are just dipping a toe in the water or trying something on for size. There's bi-curious, there's also bar-sexual, which is particularly, I think, used for women that you're straight until you've had a few drinks. It's all people trying to put up fences between the boxes to make sure that there's two boxes, and they can somehow taunt or tease you into admitting which of the boxes you belong in. I think the best way to combat these is to take the idea literally and explain why actually being curious about how your sexuality works and how it might change over the course of your life is a good thing. And yes, you're right. Yes, I am curious. I am curious about the rights of bisexual people. Yes, I do find that my social inhibitions reduce after alcohol. Isn't it fascinating the way society only allows us to do that if we've got the excuse of having had a drink to talk about our feelings, particularly as men, and just watch people's faces pale as you take something that's meant to be banter and just follow it to its logical conclusion. I wasn't born this way. I was gay as a teenager, completely gay. I wasn't interested in women or female bodies, female presenting bodies at all until my early 20s. And there's this narrative that comes up that, and that was when I realized I had not been bisexual all along. I did not realize I had been bisexual all along. I stopped being gay and I started being bisexual, as I defined the term myself at the time. And so I think curiosity, fluidity, all of these things are a sort of affront to the idea that there are firm boxes with rigid walls. And one of the things we also often hear is that bisexuals can choose which team they play for or which side they want to be on, and all of these position bisexuality as being somehow in between or in the middle. And it's interesting, I think, that when we break people out of the thought pattern that there are two boxes, what they immediately do is move those boxes to either end of a seesaw. And then you've got gay and straight as islands, and bisexuality as a rope bridge swinging in the middle, because you don't want to live on the rope bridge. You've got to get to solid ground. You've got to pick which team you want to be on. You don't want to be left in the middle when the last person's name calls. You've got to decide which one of two things. And I think, as with a lot of muddied thinking about trans and where non-binary fits in, having a third option doesn't mean you go from 1 and 2 to 1, 1.5 and 2. Having a third option means you've got a third option. It doesn't have to be anywhere near the other two. It doesn't have to be that there's a line you can draw between all 3 dots or all 6 dots. There doesn't have to be a shape that these things make. They don't have to be on the same plane. They could be in 3-dimensional space all over the place. And people have this idea that bisexuality has to be in the middle, and so you're part gay and part straight. And I think we're getting away from that.
Yeah.
And I think things like bi-curious are really a dying gasp of people trying to pull us back into a either or, them and us, friend or foe thinking on these things. Well, you've got to decide which you are, because otherwise I can't talk to you. I got told that once.
Oh my gosh. Lynne, you mentioned earlier when you were just talking about the fact that you felt you had to come out twice, and Marcus has talked about similar stories about how their experience. So, how was your coming out experience when you said to people, "No, I am bi"? You said initially you maybe thought it had to be. How was that experience with friends, family, other people? What was it your coming out experience like? Was it a
I
positive
think
one?
it was. I think it was interesting because I am married to a woman, so there was some by that point. I don't know, we've been together for ages. I don't know if we were married at that point because I don't think it was legal, but we'd been together a long time, and I just had people go, but that's disrespectful to your partner. And I was like, how is my sexuality disrespectful? Are you in an open relationship? And for full disclosure, no, I am not and would never be. It's not my style. And I do not mind other people wanting to do that's their choice. But it's not me. And often with bisexuality, you often got to, oh, does that mean that you want a throuple? Which is three in a relationship. Does that mean you're polyamorous? Do you want to have? I was like, no, none of the above. And actually, for some people, that is how they identify, but that's not how I identify. And for some people, they didn't understand it. And for some people, they thought I was doing a disservice to lesbians. And I had difficulty on both sides of the equation. For some people, they thought that meant it was open field because that meant some men, they thought that meant that, oh, they've got a chance, forgetting I am married and not interested in any way, shape, or form. But that actually did cause some issues. So in a workplace, it meant, and I did have to take this through action within the workplace, but a person then thought that meant that was open to me wanting to be attracted to them, and then open to them to do very much inappropriate behaviour. It was a gentleman. I wouldn't really say gentleman, but anyway, it was a man. And so I had to actually take a case. And I was their LGBT network lead at the time as well.
Wow.
Yeah, you're brazen is what I would say. But the organisation was very supportive, but that was very challenging. So there's been all sorts of different, that came after doing a thing on the internet going, it was for Bisexual Awareness Day. So I would say I have had difficulties in both spaces. But I think from my perspective, it was just once I found my safe harbour, it was fine for me in the sense that I was comfortable in my own skin, and that was the most important thing.
Yeah.
And my partner wasn't a surprise to my partner, so that wasn't an issue in that sense either. So, and as we're been together 22, going strong, it's not been an issue from that perspective. No, should it have been? But I do sometimes get to ask, are you still bisexual? I was like, yeah. I was like, are you still straight? And this particular person. So it has got has had some challenges. And somebody else said, why do you always pick the difficult path? Like, that was a very close person to me who said that one. But I was just like, it's not exact. For me, it's just who I am and how in my head, I see it as how I was created and who I am. And then I also speak in religious spaces because I'm a Christian, and I've had some backlash within those spaces as well. And some various people wanting to say, we can pray that bit away from you. And as Marcus says, I'm not that. It's not a halfway house. It's not a stopping point in the middle. And that doesn't mean for the people that journeys may take them in different places, that doesn't make their journeys less valid. It's just for me, this is my safe harbour. So I've had it has caused difficulties in different spaces. And yeah, I would say that's pretty much kind of the ones that have been the most challenging, which I realise I've skipped over in quite a light-hearted way.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for that. Thank you. Marcus, can you tell us a bit about when you came out as bi? How was that for yourself?
Yeah, this is something I talk about quite a lot when I'm delivering bisexuality awareness training to organisations and corporations, which is everyone's got a coming out story. And this is one of the things I think unites a lot of LGBT people. And it's one of the reasons why it's useful to find common ground with people. But the thing that's starkest for me about it is something that Lynne touched on there, which is that I came out as gay once to each person I was telling I was gay. I came out to my parents once. I came out to my friends once each. I came out as gay at work once. But then a few years later, when I came out as bisexual, and other people who've not had a similar journey, who started with saying they were bisexual and haven't changed, have this experience of having to come out as bisexual again and again, because are you still bisexual? Oh, but you've got a long-term partner, so have you chosen them? No, I'm still bisexual. Oh, you're married now? No, I'm still bisexual. But you're raising a kid. Surely you don't identify, say that you are, claim to be. And the answer is no, I am bisexual. I also use it as a label, but it's more than that. It's an intrinsic part of who I am. I am attracted to people. Those people are not restricted to one gender. And we have to do it again and again because people don't see it as being a stopping point. It's the middle of the pendulum swing. It's the bridge, not the islands. Last year, I was at a local LGBT forum, Christmas drinks, and I was talking to somebody I'd not met before, and I knew that he was a gay man from what he'd already said. And I didn't really want to have to do the paragraph that explains who I am, what my setup is, and all the rest of it. But he then said to me, "Oh, I heard you talking earlier about your son." I said, "Oh, yes, I've got a son. He's 13. He goes to the local school." And he said, "Oh, and this is with your current partner?" I said, "Yes, with my current partner." He was like, "Oh, can I just ask, how does that work?"
Oh my.
And I said, "Oh, my partner and I live together. We are married, and we're raising a son." And I could tell where this was going to go. So I was a little naughty, perhaps, and I started playing the pronoun game. And my partner has a full-time job, and they do the childcare at the weekends and so on. And I do the childcare in the daytime. And eventually he looked very confused and said, "Can I just ask, though, did you use a surrogate or did you adopt?" And I said, "No, my partner grew the child in their uterus." And I could see the cogs seize in his head. And this is an LGBT forum. And I then said, "I'm bisexual." And I thought, there we are, finally done. And he said, "Does she know?"
Oh my gosh.
And I said, "Yes, she's bisexual together." Sorry, I said she's bisexual too.
Yeah.
And he was like, "So does that?" And no, that doesn't mean.
Oh god.
No, that doesn't. We're not having wild swinger parties
Oh,
and dangling from the trapeze while we have sex with random groups of strangers. That's not the way that works at all. But I've never had to come out as bisexual to a partner.
Yeah.
I've never had to. I have sometimes told male partners I'm bisexual. All of the female identifying partners I've had since the 1990s, I've met through bisexual community events and through the bisexual community. So there's a marvelous thing that happens when you do that, which is that weight is lifted. You don't have to go, "Oh, but how's it going to go when I bring up the topic, capital T?" Because job done. If you meet someone at a bisexual event, the onus is on you to tell them if you're not bisexual.
And the thing is, this is why when we were just before we came on, why we need to do these, have these conversations, because you were at an LGBT event, you would have thought somebody, if they're either knowledge about the LGBT community or from the LGBT plus community, that they would have been more aware. But this is why, because there are so many myths, so many misconceptions, so many people have got a real negative perception about people who are bi. And I think I loved you doing the little tease, but sometimes you have to, because they need to come to the realization themselves. And actually, when you were talking, I thought that's a little bit intrusive anyway, even the way they were questioning you. But anyway,
I was going to say,
oh, go on, Lynn.
I just, it triggered something from just a kind of a memory for me as well on that. Was just a couple of, was the fact that, but because I'm bisexual, that must mean my wife's bisexual. She's not, she's a lesbian. So there was that sort of inference, but it was also the family thing. I think it's really difficult when you ask people about, do you have children? Do you have that is a really challenging area anyway. And for me, I often get asked that one. And I love kids, and I do a lot of youth work, and I often with my godchildren, etc., etc. And a lot of people assume that I have children or etc. And so I get asked the question, "Oh, do you have children?" And now we go, "No." And then they don't just stop at that point. They just continue to ask the questions, which for somebody who's got fertility issues and desperately wanted children, but it just wasn't going to happen within our relationship for many, many valid reasons, that was a hard journey anyway. So for someone to push that one back through is challenging. But the worst one I got was, well, you should have had a relationship with a man then, shouldn't you? As in, because we were bisexual, you could have done. And I'm like, nothing about my circumstances. That would not have worked either, but nice try. And that, I think that's just the liberties that sometimes people think you can take with those questions, and that reinforce that negativity or that kind of idea that you're choosing, because and that binary bit of it has so many repercussions for day-to-day life and conversations and interactions with people. And that one was a particularly challenging and hurtful one.
People are far too, I think whether it's LGBT or T, people are far too intrusive often. And I think if somebody was straight, they wouldn't be asking all those questions. Do you know what I mean? So it's just the whole thing. People sometimes feel they're it's acceptable to do that, and it's not.
Although with women, I think often we get asked about children, so I think it's a gender issue as well.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned earlier about, and I totally agree with it. I see this where you say people who are bi, who are male or female, often have different perspectives about them. So men who are bi and women who are bi may have different perceptions of them or different ideas. Lynne, I know you talked about it first. Anything you want to add about that? And then Marcus.
Yeah, just that I'd say apparently bi men don't exist. There's even a book with the same title. But from a bi women perspective, it's very much the sexualization of it. It's very much, I think, because of the porn industry and the porn industry having two women together, and that's seen as something that is an act that is done to please men, that there is a lot of that has some harmful narrative, which then impacts bi women, and bi women are definitely sexualized. They're also seen as being greedy, which is, I think, not just for bi women. I think that's across the spectrum for bisexuality. Can't decide, all of those kind of things through. Very promiscuous, etc. And those narratives are dangerous. They're physically dangerous to bisexual women. And I would say microaggressions are definitely out there, but also just some of the attitudes towards that some men can have that means about a bisexual woman and their body and what that gives them an entitlement to. That is challenging and can be quite dangerous.
Okay, thank you, Marcus.
Can you repeat the question?
About the perception of male people who are bi, or not necessarily about perception around genders and bi. So some people think if you're a female or bi, that sexualization that Lynne mentioned, and sometimes when it's not female, you get a different interpretation or assumptions.
I think this is one of the things that comes down to ingrained societal prejudices and mechanisms, which is that people assume that a man who says he's bisexual is trying not to admit he's gay. So, for example, Elton John famously came out as bisexual before saying, actually, that wasn't true. I am gay. So a bisexual man is actually a gay man, so he'll end up with a man. And then conversely, a bisexual woman is saying she's bisexual to titillate men, and so will end up with the men. So bisexual people always end up with men, and I think that's the patriarchy. I think that's the idea that men are superior and therefore everyone should be with one. And honestly, if you met men, there is this idea that and it's tied very much in with the whole toxicity of masculinity, rather than, I'm not sure what the opposite is, nutritious masculinity, perhaps. The idea that being less male, and because being gay was seen as bad, therefore being gay is not just being less male, it's being more female. And because the easiest behaviour to spot and label as gay was effeminate behaviour, this then led to the stigmatisation of feminine gays, using the word effeminate to imply that they're not entitled to be feminine. And I think it's very much all geared in with that. It's much easier for people who are female presenting, female bodied in the media to come out as bisexual, because there's a sort of hunger for that from the press, because it's not seen as damaging the walls of those rigid boxes that I'm always going back to in terms of people's thinking. Whereas the idea that being male or being masculine could be broader than you think, could have fuzzier edges, is seen as an attack on men by men, particular men, specific men. And we have a situation where if you come out as a bisexual man, everyone is waiting for you to say, actually, what I meant was, I am gay. And partly this is because of the historic thing we've had of people trying to use bisexual as a stepping stone to test the water. Or I'll come out as bisexual and see how that goes. And if that goes well, I'll give it a bit and then I'll come out as proper gay. Yeah, so I think it's a problem that we don't think these things can be real if it's diluting masculinity. And we're very eager to see them as real if they are reinforcing the male gaze. G-A-Z-E. Obviously not the male gaze, G-A-Y-S there.
No, I know what you meant. In terms of representation, how do you feel about representation when it comes to who are bisexuals, whether it's in society and media? What do you feel about it? Do you think there is enough representation? I think I know the answer to that, but I'll start with Lynne and then Marcus.
I'd say it's got a lot better. There's more representation than there's been, and there's a more diverse range of representation. So I work for Schools Out, who founded UK LGBT History Month, and every time we highlight 5 historical people and we make sure one of them is bisexual, that is specific by design, and that has been since it's been the entire time that has been running. It is quite hard in history to find, to be able to be sure if somebody was bisexual or not, because language changes through, and often special friends were used as a code word for actual same-sex relationships, which makes looking at LGBT plus history sometimes challenging, unless you have some nice diaries like that are out there, for example, that you can then actually read from their own words. But I think representation is extremely important, especially for young people, and that representation has to be diverse, because bisexual people come from all ethnicities, may have a disability, come from all different religions, come from all different walks of life, and we really need to and go on to have very successful lives. So people, I think that's the other thing. It's really important to know that bisexual people can have happy but successful lives, because that isn't always the thing that is shown. I'm not saying that every bisexual person has to be success, and success is a subjective standard and all of that, but it is really, really good and reinforcing to say that bisexual people can be successful and can be happy, and that's something that I think is really important that we reinforce. And in schools, I think it's really important that when we look at LGBT plus representation, it's the whole gamut. It's not just one area, because I think it's really important for representation, because for me, if I'd known earlier on that a different definition of bisexuality, I wouldn't have struggled for so many years. That's fundamentally, for my personal life journey, would have been so much easier. And I think things like Heartstopper have been brilliant with this.
Yes.
And I have to say, watching Heartstopper, for me, I almost grieved for what I didn't have. For me, it was a very weird experience. It was very uplifting, but there was almost this sense of grieving for this time to explore that I didn't get. And so I haven't actually watched Heartstopper 2 because was left feelings. I really want to watch. I read the books. I love the books by Alice Osman. They're amazing. But I haven't quite got the mental fatuity that I really want to put myself through that again. And I know it's wonderful and joyful, but it also was that bit of, oh, okay, as someone that was in school in section 28 when everybody was like, don't talk about anything LGBT at all. So I think representation is extremely important, but not just in media. I think just representation generally. I think you can't have both sides of it. And representation goes further than just posters or talking about people. That's representation in research. So for me, that's a big thing. There is so little research done, and when the research does come out, for example, with health, we have worse health chances and more instances of depression within bisexual women within that, for example. Yet they actually hasn't been much more as to why is that happening? What is this? And that doesn't mean because you're bisexual you're going to have mental health challenges, but because of how the world can be to navigate, that can help exacerbate or cause mental health challenges. And I think that it's that diversity goes and kind of representation goes further than just how it's in the media. And that's my thoughts.
Definitely. When you talked about research, oh my gosh, we love the medical profession, don't get me wrong, but sadly research still is often through one lens. Often when they're talking about, they're doing their research, so absolutely in terms of the bi community as well. I was like, yes, ferociously going, absolutely. Marcus, what about your views on representation?
I have a whole section on this when I'm doing training, and it's very gratifying to hear Lynne rattling through all the points I normally have to make myself. I'm just crossing them off on my list of things I need left to say. I don't want to go back over anything she said there. Fantastic stuff. One of the things about representation is that we're getting to a stage where people are trying to have bisexuality be incidental and not plot. So it used to be that if somebody was going to come out as bisexual, it was going to be as part of the storyline explaining about why they're cheating on their partner, or why they are also a sex worker, or also on drugs, or also something else that narratively is a bad attribute to have, according to the story being told. And we're getting to the stage where people just happening to be bisexual, which is good, but often there's a problem, which is that it's being written by people who don't have experience of what it's like to come out as bisexual themselves. So the background character mentions that they have a husband rather than a wife. And for the writers, that's, oh, we've done our bisexual representation. But the audience is still fitting everyone into those two boxes. So as soon as you're visibly not straight, you're automatically gay. A famous example is Willow from the TV show Buffy the Vampire Slayer. As soon as she was attracted to a woman, she stopped being straight and started being gay. Now, I don't know whether that was the writer's intention. I wouldn't want to peer into the mind of Joss Whedon on even a sunny day. The fact that this happens is very quick and automatic. And one of the most wonderful things for me that battles this is the proliferation of flags. Because when you see somebody in a TV show with a bi flag pin or a sticker or similar to that, you don't need to have that paragraph of explanation. You just go, that person's comfortable wearing a bi flag. And it comes up the question, who is representation for? Is it for us who are in the know about what the flag means to go, there's someone like me. Fantastic. I feel more welcome in the universe. Or is it there for people who don't know what it is, who it might pass by? But also, someone was saying recently online somewhere that there's too many flags and I don't know what they all mean. And I thought, well, that was wonderful. It's brilliant. Think about how many flags there are outside of LGBTQIA. Think about Ecuador and Venezuela, Micronesia. The Swiss flag, okay, that's a white cross on a red background. For visibility, that's a big plus. Sorry. But actually going and looking up what these things mean takes you to that community's definition. If people say, what are all the extra colours and triangles on the rainbow flag? And they go and look to find out, then they will find out new information they might not have had, some of which might make them think about themselves and the way they interact and fit into the universe in terms of sexuality. If they don't, and they just think, oh yes, that's the gay flag, that's still a little bit job done, isn't it? In terms of representation outside the media, one of the things I think we should touch on is representation within LGBT organised events. And one of the tools I like to give people, particularly when it comes to if their workplace is organising something, the mandate has come down from on high. We're going to do something for LGBT History Month. We must do something. Here is something. I will do that. Is to say, that's great. What are you doing for each? And then just to wait. And when they say each, you go LGBT. Now, I believe the acronym is too short. I believe there should be longer acronyms, multiple acronyms. There doesn't need to be a single agreed on list of who everyone in the universe is. But even if your workplace is doing just LGBT rather than LGBT plus, 25% of that is the letter B. So say, that's great. So what are we doing for each? Our list of famous people, are a quarter of them bi, pan, multiple attraction? The people we're going to have on this panel are, we've got 2 gay men who happen to work in HR, and we've got a trans person who didn't realise they were going to be forced to do this, but they came out in a network meeting and now they've been shoehorned in, despite the fact they don't want to. And we've got an external trainer. Okay, LGBT. In terms of representation, this is actually a thing I've noticed with the shoehorning, is that if you go to a work rainbow network and you tell people you're bisexual, the next thing you have to say is often, no, I don't want to be on the committee.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm getting a recognition there because we went to our local London Borough LGBT forum. And when I came out as bisexual there, it wasn't even at work. It was just there. They're like, oh, wow, we need one of you. We need one of you on the team. Yeah. Oh, one of me. Do you need one of me as in someone with glasses and a moustache? You need someone who's a confident communicator. Oh, no, just need a bisexual. So,
yeah. It's unsurprising, but it's sad to hear. But yeah.
But this is one of the things, is that people do have lived experiences and they do have their own definitions and take on things. But that doesn't always mean, from a training point of view, that Sue from accounts or Gary from HR is the best person to educate the rest of the company about what it's like to be lesbian, gay, bisexual or transgender. There are people out there who have put a lot of time into converting a long-lived experience into useful ways of communicating these things. I hope I'm one of them. And it's so much more heartwarming to see people getting the education from someone who isn't then going to spend the next however many years of their work career having to field random questions at the water cooler about, oh, you remember a couple of years ago when you said you were bisexual? Are you still bisexual? Yes. Okay, so can I ask about when you're having sex? No, please don't. We're at work together.
It's one of the
representation,
things...
I think, in the media is important. I think it's important at events. And I think it's important in training.
Were you going to say something, Lynne?
I was just going to actually echo that whole thing about when you're organising events. Many years ago, somebody actually called me out, and I'm really glad they did. Avi, who set up Bi Pride, we were doing a panel one time, said, oh, so who else is on the panel? Actually, I did have representation.
Yeah.
But I hadn't consciously thought, I'd just innately done it. So I had representation, but I hadn't consciously thought about it. And they'd said, I don't speak on a panel unless it's representative. And I thought, oh, I can do that on panels when I go speak. And it never occurred to me that I actually could do that at that point. And so for the ones we've been doing, we had been doing them representatively, but it's unusual for organisations to actually take that approach. So yeah. I have been definitely more mindful of that. And I think that I have the ultimate respect for UK Bi Pride, which I've founded along with other people, but because Prides are amazing to go to. And I remember my first Pride I went to, but I remember going to Bi Pride when it was the first Bi Pride and just crying because it just felt like I'd come home, and it was just having a space that was just for the bi community, and all it wasn't just for the bi community, but bi-centered space was just so. I didn't realize what I'd been missing. I think had been the term, and just you just could be. You didn't have to explain. It was very much just be yourself. And I think that sort of representation is really important. I would also say that UK Bi Pride does an amazing job of accessibility. And as somebody with some accessibility needs, that's been really welcomed. And a lot of other prides could do a lot more to think about both accessibility, but also just about bisexual inclusion within them. And that representation is really important. And for those people that are training and do deliver training out there specifically, I think the one thing that gets annoyed is where you've got a really big training budget and then people say, oh, will you do it for profile or for free? I think we have to, if you've got experts coming in to speak about it, you need to, where possible, remunerate them. Because what you will find is most people will do stuff for small charities that don't have budgets, but when you come to ones that actually do and I just say no, but then you walk there and there's beautiful catering and beautiful wines and everything else, and you think, well, you could manage that. So I think that representation comes with the training side as well. So just to echo Marcus, really, with the training side and with making sure that your LGBT spaces are safe spaces.
The bi-people, lovely. You mentioned Bi Pride, which is great. We've got BiCon, Bi Visibility Day. Marcus mentioned his Bi Index. Any others that we need to be letting people know about if somebody is bi and wants a community, or what like you said, you went to Bi Pride and you felt you've gone home. There is such importance, isn't there? So either talking about, let us know about any others, or the importance of having things like Bi Pride, BiCon, Bi Visibility Day. Marcus. Oh, sorry, Lynne was about before you then. Go on, Lynne.
Oh, mine was just going to be very quick. Mine was going to be pretty much, I think that all organisations should do UK LGBT History Month and make sure it's fully representative, includes bi representation. And next year's theme is activism and social change. So it's a really good one to fit in with lots of things. And the proper launch for that's in November. So that's wearing my other hat as well for this one. But I also think the Bi Awareness Days are really important, Bi Visibility. But also there's a Bi Health Week. And I think that's really important to do. But Marcus has the most amazing knowledge on BiCon, and I am still yet to get to one, so I'm really gutted because every time I try, it doesn't work with life. So Marcus, please tell us all about BiCon.
Yes, please do.
Wow, okay. Way back in the depths of time, I think 1982, there was a trade union conference, possibly the TUC itself, and at that they had a workshop about feminism for men, which in the 1980s was a radical thing. And the people got together in that, and it was a male-only space. And about halfway through, they realized that most of the people in the room identified as bisexual. And for a group of men in the 1980s, that was incredible and radical. Looking back, the sort of men that are in a trade union and then go to a workshop on feminism for men, perhaps not as remarkable as all that. And so out of that came the London Bisexual Group. The London Bisexual Group decided what it wanted to have was a sort of a whole day event of discussions and workshops and conversations that couldn't be had anywhere else. And so they had the first national conference on bisexuality. Time passed, and people who were in the bisexual community who also attended other events went, hey, this is a bit like a science fiction convention rather than a conference. And they have names like WorldCon, or it would be London Con or whatever. And so the idea of it being called BiCon came about, which gets around, is it a convention or a conference? It's a bit of both. And for the last 20 years at least, BiCon has been pretty much set as a 3 to 4 day residential event, normally at a university outside of term time, so it can be using university accommodations, lecture halls, classrooms and so on, where you'll have 5, maybe 6 different things running in parallel streams across the timetable of all of the conversations you want to have. So bisexuality and faith, or safer sex for people who have male body partners, or talking about trade unionism, or talking about green politics, or life drawing, or all going on the bouncy castle, because it was also a kind of a holiday. It's like a bisexual Butlins feel to it. There's been different locations and teams for it across the years. It traditionally moves around the country, so it's always local. Eventually, the idea is to where you are in the country. And the largest ones have been 300-400 people.
Yeah.
And it's a really wonderful, nurturing, but weird space to have this temporary bisexual village appear, where you get up in the morning and leave the accommodation you've got on site and go and get breakfast with other bisexuals, and then go to workshops or talks or play games, board games, whatever, with other bisexuals, and have lunch with bisexuals. And then in the evening go to a bar that's pretty much all people who identify as bi or pan or whatever. And if someone is there who is a partner, they might have to say, oh, actually, sorry, I need to explain that I'm straight. Which is a conversation they don't have anywhere else. And then there's a late night party, a DJ and so on. And the conversations that happen are the ones that can't happen anywhere else. And everyone gets a bit teary at the end because the bubble's about to get burst and the real world beckons, where there's rain and taxes and straight people. And yeah, that's BICON. I've been involved with the organising of it over the years a number of times. Not recently. I've moved into more small-scale, intimate events. The one that I've recently been involved with is called Cabaret, which has the strapline, A Night of the Bisexual Variety, which is a bisexual cabaret night, which came out of the realisation that certainly in London, the drag scene skews very heavily towards people only being out as gay. It's got a lot better in the last few years. There's a lot of wonderful things. The NB show, for example, and the various things that are organised by people like Carrot are wonderful examples of more diverse drag. But what we need in any group in society is to see ourselves in the mirror.
Yeah.
It's looking in the mirror where we recognise ourselves, and the mirror in the bathroom's great, but the TV is a mirror. Are we seeing ourselves reflected on television? The stage is a mirror. Are we seeing ourselves reflected on the stage at LGBT events? So this was a chance to have bi-centred cabaret acts. I talked to Pride a couple of years ago and I said to them, so do you have any bi acts on the cabaret stage this year? And the person I spoke to said, oh, we wouldn't dare ask people. That would be wrong for us to ask people to out themselves. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not saying you have a census. Do you have anything that talks about bisexuality or centres bisexuality, or people who will sing songs about bisexuality or poems about bisexuality, or in my case, magic? I'm a magician and I perform bisexual awareness magic. I know it's a niche, but the idea is that what if what you're doing talks about who you are and doesn't shy away from the fact that you're bi or pan? That gives people in the audience a chance to go, oh my God, I'm not the only one here. So yeah, BICON is huge. Cabaret is small. In between there's lots of other things. There's a fabulous website called This Is Biscuit, which does a lot of activism and has some fabulous stickers and merchandise and stuff that you can get to do your bit to making bisexuality more visible through your accessories and so on. Bisexual Community News, of course, is the venerable grandparent of it all, having started in the 1990s and still going strong, which is a bisexual newsletter, comes out several times a year. There's a few over in the States, but in the UK, those are the main ones I would recommend.
That's really good, because there might have people listening who They want to find out more and find that
Yeah.
community. Go on, sorry, Lynn.
There's one of those on Twitter. There's a really good bi history one, and I know that Twitter or X or whatever it's called now can be quite a toxic place to be, but there is a bi history that does bi history every day, and I quite enjoy that one.
Oh, brilliant! Thank you, brilliant.
I mean, the key to all of this is going to Google and typing in the words bisexual community.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating for me that so many people who could use the internet think there isn't a bisexual community, because learning is so strong in their heads that there won't be. There can't be, because I'm the only bisexual person. No one else is bisexual. Bisexuality is very rare. That it doesn't occur to them to search. Typing the words bisexual group near me into Google would not occur to many people, because it's so ingrained that there can't be a positive result to that.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one last question, because time, like you say, we could be here for hours. We could break this up into sections and talk about so many different topics. But just in case there's anybody here who's an employer or a manager, or you mentioned earlier around making sure when people are doing events and LGBT plus, or at least doing as a minimum the LGBT, what other good practice or recommendations would you give to employees? Because we have so much research that shows that bi people at work don't feel comfortable being out. They often feel less satisfied with their roles, etc. Any sort of good practice for employers to making sure that their bi staff feel included in everything they do at work? So I'll start with Lynne and then Marcus.
So from my side, if your organisation has staff groups, making sure that they're fully inclusive, and I don't just mean the LGBT group, all of the groups, so that they can work together, because we're never just one thing. So I think it's really important that those groups are really clear, and that LGBT network is inclusive of everybody, and it's in their mandate to do that, but it's not all led by the one bi person, as Marcus said earlier. It needs to be just ingrained in the way things are organised. But when you're looking at LGBT representation, you do that across the board. But you make sure your policies and your language that you use within your policies that's really key, is inclusive of the whole LGBT plus community, because it can span into ways where it isn't, if it just centres on one side of the community versus another. And it's having a real understanding of those needs and bringing them out to the fore and letting people know. So often people may do things for awareness days, and they're great, and it is really good to have those. But what I found was having a cuppa and a convo. So for managers, I set up with the LGBT team, a cuppa and a convo. That's exactly what it's called. And we'd had an hour where different team managers could come through and we could talk about things. And that meant that there was some really valuable conversations where people were maybe scared about language, were scared about knowledge, could share, could find out, and could do more. I think that was really helpful, because that was a space in which people could explore without feeling fearful of saying the wrong thing.
Thank you, Lynne. Marcus, I know you obviously do a lot of this in your work.
Yeah, I think the important thing to realise is that if you're managing people, is that they are whole people, and that your employees aren't a collection of neatly discrete slices on a pie chart, and you're going to then talk to this person about this one thing because they're bisexual, but they also might be disabled. They're bisexual, but they also might be a parent. They're bisexual, but they also might be an atheist. Or there's a tendency, I think, to see people as being, but wait, you're a Christian? Oh, I wanted to talk to you because you were bisexual. And that's, no, talk to me because I'm me. Talk to me about all of my things. It's not going to be easy necessarily to distinguish where things are beginning and ending. If there's a problem in the workplace, it might not, it's quite likely not, to be about one thing in isolation. It might be a combination of things that sort of merge into each other. And I think it's also important to realize that you can't usefully divide people into, and this happens and I see it and it's awful, normal people and minorities. Because whatever you're classifying as normal there will be people from all of the minorities in there as well. You can't go, yeah, okay, this is for LGBT employees and this is for everyone else. Oh, okay. Everyone else is a particularly bad one. I once saw a LGBT network which was called the Staff Glee Network, and Glee was GL, gay, lesbian, and everyone else. It's wow, we're everyone else. So trans people. And I appreciate your love of a good acronym, but this idea that there's one big group and all the rest are somewhere over there isn't the way the world works. There are people of all minorities everywhere. Bisexual people are as likely to be football fans as they are opera lovers. There's nothing inherently different about being attracted to more than one gender that stops you wanting to watch the Olympics versus play chess or have a disability or want to give your opinion on form design or accessibility of websites. It's not useful to think of people as being, it's not useful to think of people as being a thing, because you shouldn't think of people as things, but also remember that when you talk to somebody about something like sexuality, which is part of their lived experience, it's part of their whole lived experience. My life as a bisexual isn't separate to my life as someone with a sight difficulty, or different to my life as someone who is non-binary or mixed race or any of the other things. If you want to talk to me about how does this change in the office impact you, I might not be able to tell you about it in terms of one single category.
Thank you. And yeah, and I think, as we know, what you're there talking about and what you've both talked about is about intersectionality, isn't it? And the aspect of it's not just one layer, but it's just about, as you already said, not missing out where people completely miss out the B. We want to make sure that all in organisations, when they're looking at sexual orientation, we're looking at inclusion, that B is part of that, because often it is missed out. We said right at the beginning, sometimes it can be that invisible letter. But brilliant. On that note, I think we will draw it to a close, because we have talked, like I said, we could talk. I say this in every podcast because I get really engrossed. I think, God, we could do another hour. But for the listeners, we will keep it at that. And I just want to say thank you so much, Marcus and Lynne, for talking to us. We may get you back to even talk about another aspect of bi. But for now, we will say goodbye. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for tuning into the podcast. Please do spread the word about our channel and tune in for our next episode.